For those of you who are here, I want to welcome you to our second Great Books presentation of the spring semester. We'll have one more coming up um, in April, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But today I want to welcome you and introduce our presenter, Marilyn Center. Marilyn came to Johnson County in 1991 as an adjunct, and she was hired full-time in 1998 to teach composition and children's literature. Marilyn holds a Bachelor's of Science from the University of Missouri in secondary English education, and she holds a Master's of Arts in English from UMKC. Much of her early um, study was centered, as I understand, was really on Wordsworth and transcendentalism, and sort of trying to bring together notions of spirituality and nature and sort of the oneness of that. But from my understanding, some of that sort of transferred or morphed into a real interest in children's literature. And Marilyn has certainly made her mark in that here at Johnson County. In her courses over the years, she has promoted service learning. She's been active as the College Now liaison for the college. In fact, you kind of go around the area, everybody sort of knows Marilyn. She has her hand in a lot of different areas. She's worked with the National Alliance of Concurrent Enrollment Partnerships. At the college, she has been active with Ed Affairs, the Great Books presentations, Common Read, assessment, a number of peer reviews. Marilyn is just one of those people you're sort of grateful to have both in your personal life and certainly in your professional life as she gets things done. All right. Marilyn has some hobbies. She loves tennis, and she told me at first that she loves to garden, but actually I think she enjoys cooking the benefits or the rewards of that gardening more than the actual gardening itself.
That's true.
That's true. Marilyn is here today to talk about Neil Gaiman's Anansi Boys or Anansi Boys. We're not quite sure. There might be some debate on actually how the title is pronounced, but she's going to give us, I know, a wonderful presentation. And she said, initially she was drawn to the book because of its expansive worldview, its use of world mythologies, and just simply the notion of God's walking among us. And if that's not, a tease enough, I don't know what is. So I'm excited to hear what she has to say, and I'm sure you are too. So Marilyn, presentation's yours.
Well, thank you, Michael. That was humbling. Yeah, when Michael and Maureen first asked me if I would do one of the great books, I said, oh, sure. And then they said, what book? And I don't even know why Anansi Boys fell out of my lips. So I've spent several months trying to figure out what it is about Anansi Boys that drew me to it in the first place. And I will just have to tell you that I think Michael had the answer right there. And I promised him I would start this way. I like gods who walk around in blue jeans. Okay, so I'm going to tell you the story of Anansi Boys. When we first got this idea of doing great books, and really that was more maybe Maureen rather than we, but the idea came up and we decided that we wanted people to kind of say, well, what was your personal connection with the book? Why would I have chosen this book? So I'm going to tell you that it's a pretty natural progression for me. I grew up in the 60s when everything was space race. That's all we thought about. Everybody was involved in the space race. We were encouraged to believe that the universe would soon be at our fingertips. And we watched as Apollo shot after Apollo shot escaped the bonds of the gravity and went through the stratosphere and then to the moon. Mars this week, people, surely we're going to go beyond the solar system to Alpha Centauri, and pretty soon we're going to just discover hyperspace and be zipping around like, Star Trek, right? We did land on the moon in 1969, and that was very encouraging. And of course, Star Trek came out, this is for the Davises, came out in 66 to 69. And I was exactly the right age to be enthralled with this idea of just interplanetary travel and escaping the boundaries. That led me to some really great science fiction kinds of reading. I had read all of the children's section of the Mexico Audrain Library. By the time I was 9, there wasn't much in there. And so I started reading kind of adult books, and I discovered, I had discovered an author I liked named Paul French, and I later found out that was just a pseudonym for Isaac Asimov. Asimov wrote this Foundation series. It was, there's the first Foundation trilogy, and then there were some sequels, and then there were some prequels. So it ended up to be a pretty profound series. But what I loved about this book was the world building that Asimov did. He created this entire 10,000 year universe, and he just walked around in it, not only in his Foundation series, but in all of his books were centered in this same universe. So the Foundation series kind of starts with this guy named Harry Seldon, who looked at the universe and said, it's going to fall apart. And so he took some steps to kind of try to mitigate that a little bit. And this goes on for, like 10,000 years. But he could talk about this entire big universe, or he could talk about one guy, one day, in one street, in one town, and live that guy's life for a little bit, all in the same universe. And it was just fascinating. So by the time I got to college, Vonnegut was all the go. Everybody was reading Vonnegut, and I loved it. It was a pretty absurdist world, but he did, like most fantasy writers, he started in reality and kind of moved beyond it. But, he could take real events, serious events, and still make them look at them in an absurdist way, so that even in Slaughterhouse-Five, he starts off with the very first line, Billy Pilgrim became unstuck in time. I was primed and ready for somebody like Gaiman. Oh, by the way, before I move on, this picture is one that Gaiman himself took. He is, from what I can tell from his blog, he's right now in New Zealand. He's spent a lot of time lately in Australia and New Zealand. So he has a very unobstructed view of the universe right there. So this idea of a large universe is right there in his camera. And I also like it, the fact that it includes the house and then the universe. So the real and then the expansiveness. So here's how I discovered Anansi Boys. The book came out in 2005, and it was in a world that was still pretty much darkened and changed by 9/11. I know it had been 4 years, but in that time, the news was still bad, and the economy was still bad, and people's lives were still bad. And I just got weary, and I quit listening to the news because it was never good. And I found out, actually reading this book, why things were so dark right there. I'm going to stop and kind of read this. Once, before the stories were Anansi's, they belonged to Tiger, which is the name the people of the islands call all the big cats. And the tales were dark and evil and filled with pain, and none of them ended happily. See, the problem during that time was that Tiger was in charge of all the stories, not Anansi. So it was a dark time. It was a Tiger time. But what happened was I started to avoid the news, and I thought music was just a little too cheery. So I started listening to books on tape, which were really CDs. And hey, we still have some up in the library. I looked yesterday. And one day I was walking through the Billington Library and discovered this book, and I picked it up and I thought, oh, I always loved Anansi Tales. And I read the blurb and I thought, yeah, this is escapism for sure. This is what I need. So I started listening to the book, and I have got to tell you that it was read by Lenny Bruce, who is a British comedian, and he did all the voices. He did man and woman and old and young and Caribbean and Floridian and Londoner and God and man and animal, and he did them all, and he never missed a beat. I got so tickled by this book at one point. I have to confess, I took 435, took the exit onto Null to go home, pulled into a parking lot just to laugh because I couldn't drive. I was laughing so hard. I mean, it was not a good book to be reading in the car. So as soon as I got through with it, I came in, I slapped it on my office mate Keith Geeky's desk, and I said, you've got to listen to this because I have to have someone to talk to about it. So this is how I discovered Anansi Boys and fell in love with the story. So what on earth is the story here? Okay, here we go. Hang on. Fat Charlie Nancy is living a mundane life in London. He's working as an accountant in a talent management agency. His fiancée, Rosie, decides that he must invite his estranged father to the wedding. Now, he's been estranged from his father for a long time because, believe it or not, those of you who are parents, Charlie found his father embarrassing. Yeah, because his father had a little too much fun in places. So he contacts the old neighbor, Mrs. Higgler. Mrs. Higgler tells him that his father has died. So he travels to Florida to kind of settle affairs. And Mrs. Higgler tells him that he has a brother he's known nothing about. She suggests that he might want to try to get in contact with his brother. And so he says, how? And Mrs. Higgler says, well, just ask a spider. Sure. So back in England, he does that. And lo and behold, his brother, who goes by the name Spider, shows up. Spider upsets everything in Charlie's world. He starts wooing Rosie. He goes to Charlie's work at the Graham Coates agency and messes everything up there. And so Charlie's had it and he needs to get rid of Spider. So he goes to Mrs. Higgler and she calls in this group of Caribbean ladies. I love their names. Mrs. Dunwitty, Mrs. Bustamante, and Miss Knowles. And they have this seance which basically sends Charlie, are you holding on here, to the beginning of the world. And that's where all the animal gods live in their caves. So he wanders around trying to find somebody who will help him get rid of Spider. And he enters into a bargain with the bird woman to send Spider away. But that bargain backfires big time as the story goes on. Everybody, all of the Caribbean ladies, all of the Londoners, everybody ends up in this island in the Caribbean. Oh, and the detective, Daisy Day. They all end up in this island where they have to work together to solve a murder and somehow or the other restore normalcy. Did you follow all that? It's an easy storyline. Come on now. It's a little bizarre, but you'll see that, again, it's not really that much of a deviation from what fantasy writers do. Gaiman himself grew up reading all of the usual suspects, I guess. He grew up reading Carroll, he grew up reading Lewis and Ursula Le Guin, Tolkien, Poe. He's got all of that literary history behind him. So when he said books with eruptions of magic into normal lives seemed like a territory that would be worthwhile to explore, it's something pretty common for fantasy writers. I love this book because it looks like he is going back through and doing the research that he needs, that critic Bethany Alexander really pulls out here. And this is what I love about his writing. Neil Gaiman borrows rituals, deities, tricksters, and fairy tales from every stone, roof, or teacup. He, speaking of not having boundaries, has none. He just breaks them all open and says, I don't care where my characters come from, I'm going to use them. And it becomes quite a large universe that he has created. Okay, so, whoops, next slide, come on. Regardless of the fact that it is a broad and wild story, it is a familiar story. this is the hero's journey. If you guys know Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, this follows pretty carefully. You could kind of draw your little finger around the circle on around the spider over here. He starts as an unknowing, unaware, everyday guy who does not know his birthright. He does not know his powers. He has to have someone tell him. So Mrs. Higgler and Spider are the ones who make it clear to Charlie that he is actually one of Anansi's sons and is therefore basically a demigod. He encounters complications, mostly from Spider and the bird woman, and they have to go through all the complications. And then there's the resolution, the big homecoming, and of course, the requisite wedding, or in this case, weddings at the end. Maureen said it was nice to read a book where not everybody dies at the end. You know, it's kind of nice. The idea of an incarnate God is not unusual. We've been talking about incarnate gods since we've been talking about gods. The gods from Mount Olympus were known to come down and have all kinds of dalliances, which resulted in demigods. If you're a fan of Rick Riordan and the Percy Jackson series, you know that poor Percy, who was having problems in the normal world, found out he was a demigod, took off to go to Camp Half-Blood so that he could hang out with all the other demigods and figure out how you get along being half god in the real world. You know, it's a nice lesson to learn. If you want to keep going, I mean, if you want to look at the Christian faith, Jesus was obviously God incarnate walking among men. So this is not an unfamiliar story to have gods walking among people, gods wearing blue jeans. If you keep looking at our modern stories, we're still talking about gods walking among us. If the song from 1995, excuse me, that Joan Osborne sung, "What if God Were One of Us?" Do you remember that one? I could burst into song, but I've been requested not to. What if God were one of us? Just a slob like one of us? Just a stranger. And in the song, it's a stranger on a bus. But I changed that to just a stranger in a karaoke bar because trust me, Mr. Nancy / Anansi and Spider would be much more likely to be in a karaoke bar and they would take an Uber home, never a bus, not their style. Then about the same time, I think the TV series Touched by an Angel came out with Della Reese, and we've had this idea of gods walking among us for many, many years, centuries, decades, whatever. All right, that gets us to this idea of the gift of Gaiman's storytelling and why it's maybe different from others. And that is that he has actually taken three different stories, three different storylines, three different narrators, three different types of language, three different purposes, and woven them all into one story. This is, I think, what really intrigues me. It's not unusual, especially in modern literature, to have more than one narrator. It's very popular now to have books where you have one character narrating one chapter, one character narrating another chapter. Even in nonfiction, we do that. So that's not unusual. But what's unusual in this one, I think, is that the languages and the style of writing and the purpose of the writing all differ. So we're going to look at those three different types of language. The first is the mystical world of the gods, where we were at the beginning of the world, where all the gods were living, and we've got Tiger and Anansi fighting for superiority, especially possession of the stories. And this is all very straightforward. It's pretty humorless. The language is very ethereal and spiritual. You're not going to laugh during those parts. Then you've got the common world of Fat Charlie and Rosie and the mother-in-law who disapproves of the wedding and, you know, the usual stuff. That's a very contemporary, humorous tone. It's very sarcastic. It's the way you and I talk to each other, right? It's just kind of modern. And then there's the fairy tale hero and the language of the fairy tale. We all know that there is a cadence and a rhythm and a pattern to fairy tales. every kid on the planet knows that you start a fairy tale once upon a time, right? That's the way they go. So this kind of storytelling is very jovial and very rural and very colloquial. And it has a much different flavor to it. I want to show you examples of each of those kinds of storytelling in the text and get in a little bit of Lenny Henry in here too. So the first is that mystical world. And this is the section, or several sections, where we talk about creation. And every culture has creation myths, right? Every single culture has to figure out how we got here. And so in this one, you're going to find that song moves in and out of this story a lot. Like I said, karaoke bars are a big part of it. Did I tell you how Mr. Nancy, the father, died? He fell off the stage at a karaoke bar, you know, as one does. So here are three sections that really kind of talk about creationism. In the beginning, after all, were the words, and they came with a tune. That was how the world was made, how the void was divided, how the lands and the stars and the dreams and the little gods and the animals, how all of them came into the world. They were sung. Isn't that pretty? I mean, that's just beautiful language. Did you notice those first three words, in the beginning? Ever heard those before? So the references to the Bible, in the beginning, and then there were the words from John. In the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was God, right? So we have biblical references in there, obviously. The next section then goes into the animals themselves, and because in this Afro-Caribbean tale, the gods are animals. Olden days, all the animals wanted to have stories named after them. Back in the days where the songs that sung the world were still being sung, back when they were still singing the sky and the rainbow and the ocean. Then, how does Anansi get into all this? You know, Anansi is one of these animal gods. Anansi stories go back as long as people have been telling stories. Back in Africa, where everything began, even before people were painting cave lions and bears on rock walls, even then they were telling stories about monkey and lion and buffalo. I lost my place. Big dream stories. People always had those proclivities. That was how they made sense of their worlds. Everything that ran or crawled or swung or snaked or got to walk through those stories, and different tribes of people would venerate different creatures. I actually can't see that because I've got part of the screen over it. But all of this then is this mystical, ethereal, spiritual voice. Anybody laughing? I don't think so. This is not funny stuff yet. The next section is, this is where Lenny Henry is reading this part, and I'm going to kind of zip over to him for a minute. I'm going to let it run for a couple minutes, so be patient because I want to let you hear at least three of his voices. But this is just the everyday world where Charlie and Rosie are fussing over the wedding invitations and who gets to be invited. And Charlie has just said to her, you know, one of the very best parts of getting married in London is that I don't have to invite my father. So let me click over here. And here we go.
And then Fat Charlie saw the expression on Rosie's face and the icy glint in her normally friendly eyes, and he corrected himself hurriedly, explaining that he meant the second best, but it was already much too late. "You'll just have to get used to the idea," said Rosie. "After all, a wedding is a marvellous opportunity for mending fences and building bridges. It's your opportunity to show him that there are no hard feelings." "But there are hard feelings," said Fat Charlie. "Lots." "Do you have an address for him?" asked Rosie, "or a phone number? You probably ought to phone him. A letter's a bit impersonal when your only son is getting married. You are his only son, aren't you?" "Does he have email?" "Yes, I'm his only son. I have no idea if he has email or not." "Probably not," said Fat Charlie. Letters were good things, he thought. They could get lost in the post for a start. Well, you must have an address or a phone number. I don't, said Fat Charlie honestly. Maybe his father had moved away. He could have left Florida and gone somewhere they didn't have telephones or addresses. Well, said Rosie sharply, who does? Mrs. Higgler, said Fat Charlie, and all the fight went out of him. Rosie smiled sweetly. And who is Mrs. Higgler? She asked. Friend of the family, said Fat Charlie. When I was growing up, she used to live next door. He had spoken to Mrs. Higgler several years earlier, when his mother was dying. He had, at his mother's request, telephoned Mrs. Higgler to pass on the message to Fat Charlie's father and to tell him to get in touch. And several days later, there had been a message on Fat Charlie's answering machine, left while he was at work, in a voice that was unmistakably his father's, even if it did sound rather older and a little drunk. His father said that it was not a good time, and that business affairs would be keeping him in America. And then he added that, for everything, Fat Charlie's mother was a damn fine woman. Several days later, a vase of assorted flowers had been delivered to the ward. Fat Charlie's mother had snorted when she read the card. Thinks he can get round me that easily, she said. He's got another thing coming, I can tell you that. But she had had the nurse put the flowers in a place of honor by her bed. And
Oops. So now, get back to mine. Uh-oh. How to get back to you? I've forgotten.
You're already back.
Oh, I'm already back. I'm not seeing it. Okay. How do I get back there? I did this yesterday with no
Just-
problem. So,
Just click on the PowerPoint at the bottom of the screen.
it's not there. I'm just going to click. Nope, that didn't do it. Well, this is really awkward. Sorry, folks.
Why don't you just stop sharing and then share again, and then you'll know where you are.
It's weird because it's not going back for me like it did yesterday. I do apologize. All right. Bummer. We practiced this yesterday and it worked.
We'll just edit this out.
There again.
Good job. There we go. All right. So that was that very everyday world. I mean, if you've ever gone through trying to plan any kind of a party and talk about, who is going to be invited and who's going to, I love the idea that, I could send him a letter and he probably won't get it. I loved that. It's very funny, very sarcastic. What do you mean there are no hard feelings? There are lots of hard feelings. That very common everyday life that we all live. Then the next one is that folk story part. And that is, how does Anansi then, as the folk character in this story, show up? Now, probably some Anansi stories. Probably there's no one in the whole wide world who doesn't know some Anansi stories. Anansi was a spider when the world was young, and all the stories were being told for the first time. He used to get himself into trouble, and he used to get himself out of trouble. The story of the tar baby, the one they tell about Brer Rabbit, that was Anansi's story first. Some people think he was a rabbit, but that's their mistake. He wasn't a rabbit. He was a spider. So you have this very colloquial, very rural, very folksy voice telling the story of who Anansi is and what kind of guy he is. So speaking of Anansi and what kind of guy he is, who on earth is Anansi? Because you've heard me talk about him as a man, Mr. Nancy / Anansi. He's a god. He's a spider. He's a trickster. He's the story and the storyteller all at once, right? Just keep that in mind, no problem. And I'm not quite sure who the narrator is here, whether this is one of the, like this is Mrs. Higgler or just that folk narrator. But here's the explanation for how to keep all that together. In the old stories, Anansi lived just like you do or I do in his house. He is greedy, of course, and lustful and tricky and full of lies. And he is good-hearted and lucky and sometimes even honest. Sometimes he is good, sometimes he's bad. He's never evil. Mostly you are on Anansi's side. That is because Anansi owns all the stories. Mawu, sky god, gave him the stories back in the dawn days, took them from Tiger and gave them to Anansi. and he spins the web of them so beautifully. In the stories, Anansi is a spider, but he's also a man. It's not hard to keep two things in your head at the same time. Even a child could do it. Later on, it says in here, you ask me if he looks like a man? Well, yes, except when he looks like a spider. It's just how you tell the story. So he appears in all of these different permutations throughout this story and really throughout all Anansi stories. This ends with saying that even a child could do it, but the narrator warns us that really a child shouldn't do it, that Anansi tales are not necessarily children's tales. And I tell my students this all the time in Children's Lit, that folk stories were not necessarily written for children. As the years have gone, if you ever read any of the original Grimm stories or the Hans Christian Andersen stories, wow, that Little Mermaid is not Disney's Little Mermaid, I can promise you. So again, these are stories that are not necessarily intended for a younger audience. Anansi stories were told by grandmothers and by aunts in the west coast of Africa and across the Caribbean and all over the world. The stories have made it into books for children. Big old smiling Anansi playing his merry tricks upon the world. Trouble is, grandmothers and aunts and writers of books for children tend to leave things out. There are stories that aren't appropriate for children anymore. And this is one of my favorite versions. You will see Eric Kimmel does a lot of retelling of folk tales and bringing them back into a common culture. And Janet Stevens often illustrates for him. It's a common pairing in Children's Lit. So he not only references all of the African Caribbean tales that he's working with there, but he also has woven in little references to our modern culture. And I put up here Spider-Man, that one's too easy, but it's really too complicated, to be honest with you, because obviously Anansi stories came before Spider-Man, but Spider-Man came before Anansi boys, and so we're not going to go into references there. But in this Anansi boys, Gaiman very purposefully brings in a lot of images of modern culture that most of us reading his books would know. At one point, remember I told you that he made a pact with Bird Woman that kind of went awry? Well, the Bird Woman was supposed to get rid of Spider, but the deal was that she would get rid of the lineage of Anansi. Oops, because that's Charlie too. So Charlie and Spider, everywhere they would go, they would start getting attacked by birds. And it kind of depended on where they were, whether they were attacked by pigeons or blackbirds. In Florida, they actually got attacked by a flock of flamingos, as happens. But as they were being attacked, Charlie said, it looks like they escaped from an Alfred Hitchcock movie. So there's our good reference to birds. Then there are references, I think, to Star Wars in here. Well, there's some Star Trek beaming around too, because to escape from the birds, Spider keeps grabbing Charlie's arm and they just zip to another place, beam me up, Spider, I guess. I don't know. But there's some Jedi mind tricks going on in here too. The way that Spider ruins Charlie's life is that he just takes over Charlie's life. He walks up to people and says, of course, when you look at me, I don't look like Charlie, but really look again. If you look hard enough, I really am Charlie. And he just convinces people that even though he looks nothing like his brother, he is. And he just says, I am Fat Charlie Nancy. And they start to accept that. If you're thinking, I am the Charlie Nancy you are looking for, I don't think you're wrong. I think that's right on in there. The last one I have on here is that Charlie was in jail for a little while, and he said that he was afraid to wake up because he was going to wake up into a universe that transformed people into cockroaches. So a little Kafka metamorphosis thrown in there as well. Why not? So Gaiman doesn't limit, in all of Gaiman's works, he does this. He wanders among the worlds. He breaks down barriers that we would think would be in place between reality and fantasy, between God and man. He just breaks down barriers everywhere. Let me make it clear, I have no pretense to being a Gaiman scholar. That would take a career for sure, because he's a prolific writer. But I wanted to point out just a few works that kind of have connections to Anansi Boys. First of all, you have Sandman, which is kind of where people started hearing about Gaiman, I think. And they were originally comic books. I think there were 97 of them. They are now bound together. I tried to pick the book up off the shelf at the library one time and almost fell over. It's very heavy because it's got a lot of ink on the pages. One of the things I want to point out is that Gaiman makes no pretense of who his characters are. So the main character in Sandman is named Dream. Character in Anansi Boys is named Spider. They are who they are, and it's right out there for you. American Gods, I didn't even bring the book with me. American Gods is a book that just really takes all of these mythologies and weaves them together. He no longer cares about whether he's going to deal with one Afro-Caribbean story. He deals with all of the mythologies. They're all in there. The Greco-Roman ones, the Norse ones, Hindu, Native American, Egyptian, it goes on. American Gods is everybody you've ever heard of. But in that one, by the way, the main character is named Shadow, and he ends up working for a guy named Wednesday. We find out later that Wednesday is the all god, Odin, chief god, or Woden, depending on which mythology you're looking at. Shadow has been in prison for a while. He was in prison for 3 years, and his cellmate was named Low Key, which sounds pretty street, hey, I'm low key. But then you realize it's Loki, right? And then this book is really interesting in that it looks at we've got all these old gods, the people that we used to worship. And then we have all these new gods. Who or what is it that we worship today? According to Gaiman, our gods don't take the form of animals anymore. They take the form of technology, of pop culture, of Wall Street greed. Those are the gods that we now worship. So there's a battle in American Gods between the old gods and the new gods. By the way, I know there's a series, I think it's on Starz. I don't get that streaming service, so I haven't seen it, but if anybody else wants to add that in later, feel free. The final book I have on here is the Graveyard Book. Of course, since I teach children's lit, this became quite familiar to me. It is a 2009 Newbery winner, which is like the Oscars for children's lit. It's the best text in a book published in America by an American citizen or resident. There we go. And that's how Gaiman gets by, because he is a legal resident in the US. But he is British and living in Australia and New Zealand. But other than that, I told you he breaks boundaries. The interesting thing about this book is that everybody gets their throat slit on the first page. Now, there's a happy little children's story for you, isn't it? And the perpetrator of this crime is called the Man Jack. Who is he? Well, think about it. Think about all those British nursery rhymes and fairy tales. There are Jacks everywhere. There's Jack Be Nimble, there's Jack the Beanstalk, Jack and Jill, there's Jack the Giant Killer. There are all these Jacks. So there's a club of Jacks, and they have this mission to fulfill. Again, Gaiman just wanders around in all these worlds and breaks down all the barriers that the rest of us might see. So I guess this kind of gets me to thinking then about, why did I choose this book? Why is it that I think that Gaiman's storytelling and his ability to weave so many stories together and his ability to think beyond boundaries was so important and so unique in the world of literature? And I like what they say here. Remember, I told you that this is a story about stories. People respond to the stories. They tell them themselves. The stories spread, and as people tell them, the stories change the tellers. Now they're starting to dream about a whole new place to live. The world may be saying, but the wallpaper's changed, yes? People still have the same story, the one where they get born and they do stuff and they die. But now the story means something different to what it meant before. I tell my students all the time in my children's lit class that part of the importance of books for kids is that kids learn about different places and different worlds than the one they're living in. And I always say, how can you dream of something different if you don't know that it exists? So this is the importance of story, letting us know what is possible. I like this because I think when I think back to 2005 when this came out, I think, well, what we need to do is just change the wallpaper, change the way we tell the story. And that changes the future, right? So I'm going to leave you with this. Stories are webs, interconnected strand to strand, and you follow each story to the center because the center is the end. Each person is a strand of the story. I started my semester this year in Comp 1 with a theme, and my theme was from Hamilton, and I bet you can figure out what it was. Who lives, who dies, who tells your story? I can tell you, I think that Neil Gaiman would say, and I am 100% sure that Anansi would say, make sure you have a dang fine story to tell. Live your story. Sing your song into being. I'm through. Let's open this up for discussion.
Thank you, Marilyn. Appreciate that. And just as she said, I'm looking at our rogues gallery of participants here today. I'm sure there's a number of questions we have waiting for you. So feel free to unmute and jump in.
I have no answers. I just want to, I can talk about it though. Dave has all the answers.
No, but I've got questions.
How about we just have a discussion? That's what, okay, go.
Have you read The Starless Sea by Aaron Morgenstern? Came out in 19.
No. Does it do kind of the same thing?
Well, it's mind blowing, and you'll need some Advil trying to figure it out. But it also follows, like some of the quotations you were putting forth, the idea of stories being creative and stories being the creation process and being the story as well as the storyteller. I think it goes far beyond what we used to call metafiction, but and it also deals with the kind of mythic storytelling that Gaiman's so famous for. So I just thought if you like this one, you'd like that one too.
I know. I really wonder about his education. I think his education in mythology was pretty much self-imposed. I really do think that he just started in reading so voraciously as a child that he became really familiar with all these mythologies. And I really am just curious about, there's no school, there's no Hogwarts for learning mythology. There's no school where you just go and study mythologies.
If only.
He is he is so familiar with them all, and that is what is astounding. And I love in American Gods where he's got them all working together against the new bad guys who are all of the things that we worship now, and is obviously asking the question, are we worshiping the right thing?
Marilyn, there is a place where you can go and study mythologies. It's called Pacifica Graduate Institute. And there's a master's and PhD there for mythological studies, which you study the underlying human characteristic of making myths.
Mm-hmm.
And then as a result, the stories naturally come out of that. So yeah, that's where I got my master's and PhD.
Awesome.
And this is a beautiful example of the things we study in our classes. As some of my students are here right now, I recognize the creation story and Anansi and all of that's in your lovely telling of the story. So thank you so much.
And that is one of the things I love about it. And when I got to that line about this is how we make sense of our world. And I've always said, if you're sitting around, watching your sheep and the sun starts going across the sky, why? And so you start making up gods. Okay, that's Apollo. He's trucking that sucker over there. So, mythologies and creationism is part of every single culture in the planet. It's an amazing thing.
I think Monica had a question.
I'm not sure if it's relevant, but in American Gods, I listened to that in my car.
There you
And
go.
there was
That
an
was the
interview,
moment.
I think it was attached to the version I had, in which Gaiman talked about writing that. And he literally got in his car and stayed at a variety of hotels as he drove across the United States while writing that book. And he would get out and write until he was done in that place and then move on, and follows the path of the character in American Gods. So I thought that was kind of cool. And I connect that, I guess, with Anansi Boyce and wondering about his process of writing, because you
That's
were
amazing.
pondering that.
Yeah, I love that idea. Yeah. And actually he came up with the idea of Anansi Boys before American Gods. But then American Gods got written first. And I don't know if that's because he needed to create his whole universe first or what, because if you think about it, American Gods is that whole universe of all the gods, like I was talking about, I just lost his name, Isaac Asimov's universe. And then Anansi Boys is that one little story of one god, in one place. The other thing I wanted to say too is that if you're wondering why things are a little dark in the world right now, I think it's because Anansi is dead for the moment. Anansi likes to die every now and then because he says, if you don't die every now and then, people really kind of get bored with you. So he likes to be dead for a while. And I assume that Tiger is telling the stories while Anansi is gone. And that's why things are so crappy right now, people. We need Anansi back, right?
Anyone else out there with a question? No?
Okay.
Marilyn, do you have anything for us?
No, I just want you to go out there and, I think everybody, as soon as things open up, we all just need to go to karaoke bars, because this has really changed my whole attitude about singing in karaoke bars and just letting it go. I don't want to spoil the end of the story for you if you want to read it, but song becomes a really important part. As that one creation part said, there were the words, and the words had a rhythm, a melody. So singing is a big part of this story too. So
I think karaoke bar is actually at the bottom of the CDC guidelines for recovery. So
I think so.
Yeah,
I
keep
think
that in mind.
thinking on the stage is not a good idea.
Right.
I think you can have karaoke Zoom. It's kind of terrible, but
How would that be
Marilyn.
different than any other kind of karaoke? But
Yeah. Marilyn, thank you so much. We are certainly better for the presentation. I see all sorts of applause going on.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. For all of you who attended, please come back. We have one more presentation this semester. Maureen and I very excited. We have April 7th. That is, of course, our first Wednesday of the month. It'll be at noon. It'll be a Zoom, just like we did here. And Professor Andrea Broomfield will be talking about Waiting for Godot. So that should be a wonderful, feel-good work to end the semester on. Hopeful, no, I'm just kidding. But it'll be a great presentation. Marilyn, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And we'll see you again.